Welcome to PE4426 and CU661 module number 2. So last week we talked about the concept of differentiation, and we concluded with a statement or a discussion on taking the student's perspective. So in a sense, as a teacher, you've been trained to be up the front and guiding the classroom. But this unit intentionally asks you to not do those things, but do it and sit yourself in the student's seat. What is it about that student that they would want to communicate to you? So a change of perspective, and it's teaching from a student-centric perspective in meeting their needs as you teach. So that's essentially the heart of differentiated practice. So here, let's go in here. This is a graphic organizer. Great little tool. So if I ask you the question, what would you say is differentiation, then I might get an answer. But actually simply giving a written tool allows people to think, what's the definition of differentiation? What does it look like? What characteristics does it have? Here's some examples. For example, you might have an extension question, you might have a lower level question, and you might have a standard question. 3 levels of questioning might be an example, for example. And a non-example helps you nut out if it's, okay, it's this, but it's not that. And it more correctly defines it. So this is a Freya named after a person who created this. You can use it for almost anything. So the graphic organizer is an example of a scaffold tool, actually. So have it. I'll pause your video and have it you write what differentiation is. We're going to go through the whole series on this course using this teaching cycle. And I've got this teaching cycle. There's initial data collection, knowing your students. That might be the beginning of the year or beginning of a big segment. And then you also might have a pre-test for this particular unit or this topic of work. For example, a student, you might know them, but they might have a slightly different understanding in the different learning area or your subject if you're a secondary. So the question is, what is the data? How do you get to know your students? So there's qualitative and there's quantitative information. Now the qualitative is getting alongside a student and to have descriptive ones, and maybe not you, but others teachers in their journey have also got. But also quantitative is about, a pre-test, a quiz, or some other tool to assessing their level in a numeric sense. So again, pause this and write down, what are some of the things that you've done or you've seen done in a classroom to collect knowledge and information about a student? What patterns do you see in those data? So hopefully you've paused, written a few things if you haven't paused now. So in differentiation, it's framed by what I call domains of differentiation. And I would have hopefully given a handout. You'll find it on site, on the Moodle site. And these are what I call the categories or domains. So from the student perspective, how's their readiness or understanding for this topic or this subject that is there? What are their interests and passions? What will hook them into the learning? And how do they learn? What style do they learn? Are they individual? Are they group work orientated? Do they like the visual? Do they like that hands-on doing? Their learning profile. So from the student side of differentiation, there's some broad categories or domains that will be useful for you. So let's have a look at those. So for the students, what's readiness? The current knowledge and understanding. It's not actually their capacity, or intuitively perhaps they had, although that is related. What do they enjoy? Self-evident. What's their preferred mode of learning? And why is this important? Well, you want to meet that student's learning need, and the one next door will have a slightly different profile of who they are. Readiness goes into it a little bit more, and the interest, great motivator. If you could have an activity where you gave choice based on an interest of a student, you'd get more people involved. So you don't have to say, oh, we're going to do it on a book which is about something. But if you could do something where it was a sport, it was a dramatic, film, TV, IT, computer sort of scenario, the learning skills could be actually achieved through different context, say, of the different types of books. So if you give that, you get a better range of engagement. Now, learning styles or learning profiles or modes of engagement, there's something for you to click on if you like, or VARK, visual, auditory, reading, and kinesthetic. So there's the descriptions of them. Here's some examples that you might want to do across that. So if you're communicating or teaching a subject, have you got a range of these things happening? Now, it might not be every lesson, but I reckon you could do more than one a lesson. If you're talking a lot, well, the auditory learners are loving it, but not the kinesthetic learners. And maybe the people say, I just need to see it written down. Or can I do something? Or have you got a video with that? All those things. So be aware, and the differentiation says, I'm going to meet the learning profile through doing something like that. So what are these? I'm going to click through. This is like data sets. Here's a learning survey. If you want to know your student, ask them. Test them. Make observations about them. So all these multitude of ones. So as part of your initial data collect, if you look at that, and remember the teaching cycle we looked at briefly on the way through, how are you going to do that? And this becomes part of your case study in assessment one, tip number one, but also your GTPA. There's a report cards, there's NAP plans, there's pre-existing information, there's school testing, there's individual education plans, end of year exams or end of term or last end of unit. You can talk, that's quantitative perhaps, and this is qualitative. Talk with their other teachers, learning support, their year level coordinator, their parents, pre-test them, survey them, look at work samples that you might collect in week 1 of your GTPA, and you'll get a rich array of data collection. Other things that you have been suggested for teachers on when they've got their own class is you might have walk around the playground intentionally, invite students to have a chat in groups of 5 or 6, and then you do that for across the first 2 weeks in a lunchtime or morning tea, and you get to know them in a qualitative sense. The GTPA, first one, is planning with data and evidence. So collect, interpret, and use a variety of student data. Well, that's your first thing. So there's some of the connections that you'll have. I love this quote. Take time to read it. Now, this obviously is it's a great extract from a book, but fantastic, doesn't it? It's saying something, and it's saying something so much. The student's saying, a bit of sass going on there, but if the teacher understood the student, then the student would be engaged. At the moment, I think they're on the verge of just rebelling, and that's no good for anyone. So, and this is an extract from one of the GTPAs, and this is what their data summary that they put into their report. So they've also had professional discussions, they looked at report cards, they looked at NAP plan as our data collector, they did a learning survey, and they did some observations. And the question I pose to you is, how would you teach student A, B, and C? So they're the focus students that they used. But, these focus are illustrative of the diversity in your classroom. So how would you teach them? Now that you know this information as a teacher, you'll respond to it. But the first thing is getting to know it. So here's a little test if you'd like to have a look at your modalities of learning and discuss that. Going to the 3 areas there, you might do your own little test, say what ticks for me, because you'll naturally teach out of your own default, which is you. But you actually have to, you have to teach out of who you are, but you also have to be aware of the students in your class. Now, Gardner's model of intelligence is, in its strict sense, is being debunked as an idea because it just doesn't stack up for a range of reasons. But the multimodal expression and exposure does stack up in terms of the research, that if we have a different way of connecting students with learning through different mediums and modes, then it actually enhances. This is an activity to do in class. Interesting. Could you do that? Can you do it without a song? And the answer is mnemonics is a way of remembering low-level information. And of course, we've got musicality in this. For some students, they just get this. Give them a system, a rhyme, or something to do that. So what's the point? The point is that students learn differently. Get a book, or I'm going to use in class Psalm 23. And you know what? You get words give visual pictures, and visual pictures aid the learning process. So pause, write something down. What have you done on PEP? And maybe what goal could you try to do more of in terms of modality sense? And modality talks to the learner profile of the student in this differentiation context. But knowing also that when students come to you, they come to you devoid of who they are, a different cultural mix and backgrounds and values, diversity. So I've put a few little provocatives in there. How would you deal with this? The answer is, I don't think it should be a problem. But for some, it's like, oh, okay, I've got a Muslim child. What's their value sets? What's their concept of teacher-learner? What's their concept in terms of some gender even, and roles that they would have, normative roles in their culture? How would you meet their needs and difference, for example? So I've used that as one thing, so a little bit provocative. There's some YouTubes to watch there. Gender assumptions. Okay, I've gone through and go through those things. Do we have stereotypes? The answer is yes, we do. Now, we all like to classify people because it helps us understand the world. But sometimes if that classification actually impedes. So, do that in your own mind. Are these masculine, feminine, or the equal? And we all say they're all equal, yeah. But there's some default things that are really you need to know as a teacher. For example, being cyberbullied, females are overrepresented here. It happens to males too, but the girls in your class, it would be. Prime Ministers, there's only been one female Prime Minister in Australia's history. So there's some real life things. What about opportunity and equity? Well, you can speak into that space. There's more female doctors graduating from universities every year now than males. But it seems to be assumed in a stereotypical sense, less and less, but to be a male one. Learning difficulties, boys are overrepresented. Absolutely, it's like a 2 to 3 to 1. So some things are real and they're not equal. So you need to actually accommodate some of those things, but you need to break out of a stereotype too. You can see the child as a child, not just a gender assumption. I put a couple of provocatives here because I think. So the best thing you can do as a teacher is to better understand the other gender. As a female teacher, how do boys work? As a male teacher, how do girls work? And if you can ask that question, I think you'll actually really equip your teaching to actually reach an area that you perhaps have either had a blind spot or you need to develop. Here's the debate. Male difference, I've had some humour in those things there. Well, I actually had to change the study here because it was some other word there. You guess what it is. Gender differences. This is from an education psychology. And I just sometimes think that we actually are doing disservice to boys. And can I say, if you get boys are going to give you more behaviour problems. They're going to give you more learning problems. So if you understand them, irrespective of if you're a male or female teacher, you actually make your classroom better. Now have a read of this. How do you think it is? Pause, have a look at it. Is that a fair call? And this is an education psychology. I think it's stereotypical because, boys are more impulsive. Okay, they rely on pictures and movement. Okay, they're aggressive and competitive, and all those things sound like, oh, this is a bad competitive. You could change it this way: they're more responsive. They're drawn to. They're likely to take on adventurous tasks. Sometimes you want somebody to be out there and to go for it. Then maybe that's the boy in the class rather than they are competitive. They are out there. Now, girls can be the same. These are generalizations. Can I say, this is from a textbook. I think it's got a stereotypical bias from that. So think carefully about your own language. Think carefully about your own assumptions. So your homework, Design a learner profile that you might use in your classroom that allows you to get to know your students so that you might meet their learning needs more. So there's the summary of a quick through of what we're doing in this week in class or online. So hopefully this video is beneficial.